Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Stephen Nash. I'm a fourth year in the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm the chair of the Honor Committee. Before we begin, I would like to ask for a moment of silence to remember those lost in nearby Northern Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York 11 years ago this day. The Honor Committee is truly excited for this event. We hope that this will be one of many conversations we have about our community of trust. Almost all of the questions that will be asked this afternoon come from you. They are based off of submissions by students and faculty. We are going to keep the discussion to an hour, so I would like to just quickly introduce the participants before we begin. Teresa Sullivan is the 8th president of the University of Virginia. President Sullivan is a leading scholar in labor force demography and is the former provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at the University of Michigan. President Sullivan began her term in August of 2010. Professor George Cohen joined the law school faculty in 1993 and became a full professor in 1995. He teaches contracts, professional responsibility, and agency and partnership. Mr. Cohen is the chair of the Faculty Senate. Professor Michael Levinson is the William B. Christian Professor of English and has written several books on modernism. He is also the director for the Institute of the Humanities and Global Culture. Hillary Hurd is a fourth-year student in the College of Arts and Sciences, majoring in the Politics Honors Program and Russian Studies. In June of this year, she began her term as the student member of the Board of Visitors. And moderating the roundtable this afternoon is Dean Alan Groves, who has served as the university's Dean of Students since 2007. Dean Groves graduated from the law school in 1990 and practiced law for 16 years before returning to the university. We hope that you find this discussion thought-provoking and interesting. With that, Dean Groves, let's begin.
Thank you, Stephen. Our first question for the panel. Forgiveness is generally considered a virtue in our society. So how do we reconcile the concept and virtues of forgiveness with an honor system that has but one sanction? Who'd like to start?
I'll start. So I think forgiveness is related to the question of intent. That is, I think we should always be willing to forgive people if they are repentant. In my faith tradition, we have a saying that the gates of repentance are always open, and I think that should be the case. And so I think forgiveness should be part of the system. But just as it's difficult to figure out or to determine intent with respect to whether or not someone was intentionally committing a wrong, we also need to figure out people's intention of repentance, and that's a very difficult thing to do. So I think repentance and forgiveness should be part of the system, but the trick is to figure out how to make it work well so that people accept it and understand how it should fit into the whole system. So so I think that should be part of it. I mean, so I think we need to talk about it. So one possibility would be that let's suppose that we have this retraction of an honor offense, and we said to people, okay, you want to retract your infraction, you basically acknowledge what you did, and as part of that, we're going to have you talk to the incoming students the following year about the nature of the infraction, why you may have done it, what you're going to do now to make sure that doesn't happen again, and I think that would be one way that we could be sure that the repentance was really true and something that the person wants to be part of the community again.
Anyone else? Please, yes ma'am. So you can take a stab at anything you want.
Thank you. The Board of Visitors has delegated to the students the honor system, but we have the college at Wise as well, and the board has also delegated their honor system to them. Their honor system is not single sanction. And I spoke with their honor chair about why this was, and he said that it was in recognition of the fact that the high schools these students came from often didn't do a very good job of preparing them in terms of what constitutes plagiarism and so on. So they have the option of a different kind of punishment, which may include community service, rewriting the paper, learning more about what constitutes plagiarism and so on. He told me this in the context of plagiarism. And he said they have no recidivism, which suggests that the repentance factor is there, and that it was more a result of ignorance than intent. So I think it's useful to remember that Charlottesville is not the only place that is grappling with the issues of how to enforce an honor system.
Anyone else?
And I'll just say that as a professor and educator, I see failure all the time. And I don't mean failure only in the form of lying, stealing, or cheating. I see failure in the loss of confidence or the inability to reach an expectation or a high resolve. I know that I feel that I let students down when I can't help them reach that aspiration. I think students come to me and they'll say they've let me down. And in that way, forgiveness is right there in every part of my educational vocation. What's important, I think, in the concept, but really in the practice of forgiveness, is that it's an invitation to begin again. We're doing that right now. This is the beginning of a new year. It's the beginning of a new semester. I don't know about you, but I find it exhilarating that academic life gives you the chance to begin again and again. Faculty start a new research project. Students promise to work harder. We have the chance to do that. And in that way, as I thought about the question of forgiveness, I realized it's profound and it's central. It also exists in tension with the single sanction. And I think we should confront that fact. We should encounter it and try to address it.
I think for me personally, I know the single sanction, for many students, really anyone involved in an honor case is very difficult. It's difficult for many professors who report, for many students who serve as support officers, and for committee members who also administer the system. But I think for me, students sort of every couple of years have an opportunity through referendum usually to vote on these issues. And I think it's very telling that sort of time after time, students overwhelmingly vote to support the single sanction and the system we have. And I think what I've always believed personally as a first year, just as I do now, is that our community is stronger when we do have this absolute commitment to do what we believe is right. And I think that's what it gets down to, is do we believe the culture that we're able to create, the community of trust we're able to have, is better off because we have sort of this firm commitment to do what we think is right in difficult situations that students face. And just one other point I do think is important, because I know a lot of students aren't aware of it, but we do have a conscientious retraction policy. So we do have an ability for students who have committed what they believe is an offense before they're aware they're under suspicion by anyone, to come forward out of their conscience, out of their own affirmative decision to admit what they did was wrong and accept the consequences. So I do think that is an important part of the system as well.
The three words honor, integrity, and trust were used many times this past June and July. Why do you think that was the case, and what does it mean for the university as we move forward? Who would like to start?
I can start.
Yeah.
So I think at UVA, on the one hand, we have the honor system, which is a judicial system run by students that has clear violations when anyone steals, lies, or cheats. But it's also something so much more than that. It's a duty to act under clear conscience with the information that we have and with the wisdom that we have. And to know that sometimes when we have more information and when events change, we should likewise change our minds, and that means to act honorably. So I think this summer, it wasn't just about judicial proceedings and that precise definition of what it is to act honorably, but also something so much more about what it means to respect that duty, to change one's mind, to consider new information as it comes to light. And I think that's what we saw this summer.
I would say that adversity and conflict of any kind tends to throw us back to our deepest values. I know when the original 9/11 happened, Americans were thrown back on their value system in a way that they hadn't been for years. And people talked openly about things like patriotism they didn't normally talk about. And churches and synagogues were full. because it had challenged people's deepest value system. I find when I talk to alumni of the university that the honor system really does form part of a positive value system with them. It's not just what they don't do, it's also what they do. And when they saw conflict at their university, they fell back on that value system. And I think that's one of the reasons that we heard those words so much this summer.
Professor?
I think that it's important to recognize that when people feel that the trust has been valued, it's an injury to the community as a whole. I think we all feel a sense of responsibility to the community to preserve the trust, and when one person may have violated that trust, we all feel it. And I think that we were getting that kind of reaction over the summer, that people felt that the values of open and honest debate had been compromised, and that is one of the important values of any academic institution, but certainly this one. And so if those things are compromised, we all feel it. We all feel the need to do something to protect and preserve and restore those values that we hold so dear.
I think that one reason we use terms like honor, trust, and integrity so readily is that we realized it was an ethical conflict that we were living through. It wasn't a power struggle between factions and individuals. It was a deeply embedded ethical question. And it made me think again that a university is not a corporation. We are not, first of all, concerned with bottom line profitability or short-term markets. We also have top-line concerns with wisdom and the education of the young. So for me, it was inspiring that the language that came so naturally to everyone's tongue was a language of ethics, that we appealed to questions and issues that we share. And for me, that's the resonance that has carried through into this fall. It would be a great shame if we didn't live up to what we saw we were capable of during the summer.
I think as well, I was able to come back for some parts of the summer, and I think it reminded me a lot of the reasons why I feel very proud. And a lot of people sort of, when I go back to New York, they say you must have had the Kool-Aid down there in Charlottesville, Stephen. You love UVA. This is unconditional love you have. And I think the reason is, and I think what people really fell back to, is a lot of the distinctive characteristics of UVA which relate to honor. A similar situation, happened at Cornell, where a president resigned after 2 years, and I think the way in which the university community responded, I think, very much speaks to the distinctive values and distinctive experience that we really pride ourselves having here at UVA. And I do think that was something very special to live through as a student, but I think it's also something very special for all members of the university community to really realize, especially moving forward as well.
Thank you. Each summer in May, as the school year comes to an end, we have our alumni who have graduated 50 years ago or more who come back to the university. And I can tell you that each year I get to go speak to them, and they only want to talk about one thing, the honor system. And what's the honor system like today? And so this next question, in part, comes from that dialogue I had with those alums of some vintage this past May. And it goes along the following lines. Should faculty members at the university be asked to agree to utilize the honor system at UVA as a condition of their accepting an appointment at the university? In other words, is it equitable to students to have a system in which the honor system and the consequences of that system apply in some classes but not in others, based solely on the preference of faculty members?
I don't mind starting with this one if that's okay with everyone. I think student self-governance is extremely important, and I think it's something that has existed for 170 years, and it's up for students to stand up and take charge and responsibility for the governance of their own system. And I think Students have had opportunities in the past, and the honor system's history has been one and should continue to be one of continuous improvement and progress. But I also do think, and I would stress to faculty, the fact that students have affirmed their system year after year, referendum after referendum, and I think very much that should really prevail, that although a faculty member might personally disagree with parts of the system, we should work together to move the system forward, but at the same time recognize that this is the system that the students affirm and that I think should be enforced universally.
Well, I would say that one of the really important things to do in hiring new faculty members is to educate them about the honor system, particularly if you have taught at another university. You've often come here with a very different mindset about how you're going to prevent cheating. And so to find out that you're expected to hand out the exam and walk out of the room is really a change of mindset. The other thing faculty need to understand, and I think this was part of the Harvard case that made the headlines 2 weeks ago, faculty are sometimes not clear about their own expectations. And faculty members do have to be clear about that. So if you allow collaboration on some assignments and then in other assignments you don't, you have to be crystal clear about when it's okay and when it's not okay, or else you trap students. And so I think it's important for faculty to go into this being aware of both the expectations that students have of them, but also the traps they might unwittingly be setting for their students.
Hillary, please.
I mean, to be honest, I know that I, over the course of UVA, have had some reservations with single sanction and the severity that goes along with that. At the same time, though, and thinking back on it, there's something very liberating, one, in being part of a community that is run by students through the honor system, and being held accountable to one's peers. And I understand that it's easy, I think, for there to be misinformation with new faculty and with students that might come from countries that don't have similar rules as regards to test taking and homework. And I think the duty then falls onto students and faculty alike in explaining what the system is and enlivening its principles. And I think with any, I don't want to say buzzword, with any word that we use so often, that we invoke so often as we do with honor, it's important to defamiliarize it and to enliven it often so that we really understand what it means for us on a continual basis. One can feel the effects of the honor system very palpably at UVA when they leave their computer in the library for 3 hours and it's still there. But to think about what honor really means in every other aspect of our life, I think really does require a constant conversation and discussion. And I think it's a burden that we all share.
I know that the faculty has obligations to the students, and the students have obligations to the honor system. I see those as distinct communities and distinct positions. We need to respect one another abidingly and deeply, but not confuse ourselves with one another. We're different organs, really, of the same body. I mean, you're basically the gallbladder, and we're basically the spleen, and we don't want to get those mixed up. I revere a notion of the community of trust, and I was thinking, Stephen, as I was coming over here, that the community of trust is such a powerful image. But then, for faculty, the deep commitments, we might say, are free inquiry, and open exchange, and taking nothing on trust. And I started to ponder that difference, that in a way, we believe in taking nothing on trust, and in a way, you could say one of the problems in June was the problem of a peremptory judgment that was too absolute, too confident of its judgment. And as I thought about that, I thought it's not a contradiction exactly. It's a difference between two communities inside the same body, and to me it's quite interesting to think about a community of trust in relation to scholars who believe in taking nothing on trust.
All right, so I'm going to go out on a limb here. Anytime faculty hear the words "you must," our antennas perk up, and so that's always something faculty get very sensitive about. So, and this may be something where I don't really understand the honor system well enough, even though I've been here for a long time. I happen to be in the law school, where we have a very strong sense of our own self-governance and dealing with various kinds of infractions. And in the law school, we're also comfortable with multiple governance systems. So I teach legal ethics, for example, and so lawyers are regulated by multiple bodies. There's the disciplinary bodies, there's the regular law that applies to them, there are court sanctions, there are agency sanctions. So there are many layers of possible sanctions and discipline for lawyers, and lawyers have to somehow navigate all of them. And my view is the same thing is true for honor violations. So I think the faculty have an obligation to promote the honor system, to respect it, to support it in terms of the values that it stands for. But I think that the faculty should retain the prerogative to address academic misconduct as they see fit. And that may include submitting a case to the honor committee. It may not. And so that's my view. I'm happy to be persuaded otherwise or talked about it, but that's the way I see it.
Maybe a corollary on that, if you don't mind, to some of you, because one of the questions that percolated into us to consider asking is a good one, which is that the honor system seeks to maintain the community of trust among students, but what kind of system should exist to maintain a community of trust in faculty and staff and administration and even alumni? And I'll give you all an example, maybe as a predicate to the question then, or subsequent to the question. When I have a UJC case, a judiciary case against a student, one of the great things about self-governance at UVA is I'm not judge, jury, and executioner. I file a complaint, and then the student and I each have a counsel, and we appear before a group of elected students. And when the student sits in that room, in the trial room, same place as honor does its business, to testify, the chair of that student hearing panel says, you understand the precepts of our honor system, and you agree to be bound by it in your testimony. Well, when I get up to testify, that student chair says the same thing to me, and I answer yes. But the reality is I'm not governed by the honor system. There isn't a consequence that the honor system can bring to bear on me if I gave false testimony in that room as an administrator in the same way that it could to the student. So what do you all see as when we talk about a community of trust? What do you see our responsibility as administrators, as faculty members, and even as alumni to the community of trust in this system? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll start. You're looking at me. So we do have a code of conduct in the faculty handbook, which I printed out here, which seems very consistent with the principles of the honor system. That is, we're supposed to act honestly in all our dealings, and we're committed to doing that. The difference is in the way that code is enforced, right? It's not enforced through the student-run honor system. It's enforced by the faculty and the administration. And so I think that's perfectly appropriate. So I think that the important thing is that we are bound by values that are consistent with the honor system's values, and I think we are. And then there's a separate question of how you address that if there is an infraction of those things.
Anyone else want to take a shot? Hillary?
When I hear the words community of trust, I don't understand that just to apply to students. I think of alumni, faculty members, and sometimes even those that live in Charlottesville being part of that community. At the same time, though, the judicial proceedings that are associated with the honor system do belong to students. And I know we would assume and trust that faculty members and alumni would not violate those rules, to not lie, cheat, or steal. At the same time, though, in thinking about who's susceptible to punishment or expulsion, I think it's important that students retain control of the system. That's how we buy into it. That's how we accept it ourselves, for ourselves. And so with that, it makes sense to me, and I believe that as a judicial proceeding, it really is just for students. But that doesn't in any way conflict with this notion that a community of trust is something that we're all a part of. A lot of alumni were students, and that's why they still invoke those words, because they were part of that system. And maybe they're not now under the jurisdiction of that system, but those ideals still resonate. And so I think that those ideas can go together in a number of ways.
I think that also speaks to really the larger purpose of the honor system, right? So the honor system is not meant to simply be a prohibition against lying, cheating, or stealing. We are supposed to foster this community of trust and have that guiding ethical framework for our entire lives. And while we certainly are different organs we're still within the same body, still trying for the same function. And I think a lot of people forget that, the honor system was actually first proposed by a professor. It was a professor who proposed the honor pledge in 1842, and I think it's that joint recognition that we're all better off when we take part in that partnership. That truly is important, and I think sort of separating just strictly sort of faculty and students. I think sometimes realizing that we have this joint mission to pursue truth and pursue excellence at the university, I think is important. And I think binds us in different ways, but I think once again unifies students in the law school or the college or Darden around this notion of hopefully the honor system and the positive ways in which it's working.
If I could just say, for me, there really is nothing more exhilarating in my job than the exchange with students about anything. It can be Virginia Woolf or the Olympics or the new XX album out this afternoon. But it's often the honor system over these many years. And I get, you're so eloquent, and I enjoy your position and your presentation, and you were so important in the summer, Stephen. I think we all owe you so much for what you did then. To me, it's part of the moral obligation and urgency and exhilaration to keep the conversation going, not to stabilize, because there is some danger that community of trust begins to stand for all ethical values. Trust is very important, but there are other virtues that we foster here. Loyalty, dedication, other forms of ethical stamina. So again, recognizing our separateness inside a unity, that seems the best way of going forward.
I guess, sorry to keep talking, but one thing I think the committee, and we're focused on this year as well, is we feel in recent years the committee hasn't done as good of a job as it should reaching out to faculty and students and having conversations like these, really sitting down, taking a step back, and being unafraid to have these sorts of conversations. I think that's a really important thing, that sometimes with honor people feel we should all be saying X, Y, and Z, and I think being unafraid of speaking our minds about these different issues and more effectively engaging the whole university community will just make the system stronger.
Next question. President Sullivan mentioned the recent cheating scandal at Harvard. In light of that cheating scandal involving nearly 2% allegedly of the undergraduate student body, Harvard seems to be considering introducing an honor code. I'm reminded of that great scene in Social Network, by the way, in Larry Summers' office, which is just great, with the Winklevi. What benefits do you feel that the university enjoys from its honor system here at UVA compared to other schools? And as a corollary of that, if Harvard College were to call any of you today and say, what advice do you have for us about starting an honor code, what would you say? So what benefits do we gain, do you think, as an institution from having the honor system, the honor code that we have? What advice would you give if someone at Harvard were to call you and say, what do you think we should do, and how should we do it?
The unspoken irony of this story at Harvard, I was reading this morning, is that I think the course in which the cheating took place was called Introduction to Congress. So if that's not an ominous sign, I don't know. To a certain degree, I think the honor system at UVA, it's distinct. It has a legacy that comes from 1842. In a lot of ways, it would be hard to create that anew at a university. It's part of our history and our culture, and it's embedded in the fabric of this place, where I think it would be very difficult to transmit to another school. At the same time, though, I think there are a lot of lessons that can be easily learned, quickly learned by Harvard and by any other university about how an honor system can work. I think the first of those is to make it student-run, to have students feel accountable to a system. They need to run it, and they need to decide among themselves what consequences are appropriate and what needs to be sanctioned. And with that, I think it's important there be a certain simplicity as well. I think a lot of the frustration and confusion with any kind of system, an honor system or judiciary system, is that there's confusion about what an offense is or isn't. And so clearly defining that, inserting that, I think would be the second lesson.
Not for the first time. I'm glad I'm not at Harvard. So I've noticed that, what they're doing is they're lining up these hundreds of students for administrative interviews, because that's how they're going to make these decisions, case by case, with lots of administrative time involved. And of course, the students and their parents have lawyered up, and so this is going to last a long time, I think. One of the things that I think we derive from the honor system is that students come here knowing that it's here. And many students are attracted here because of it. It's one of the reasons they want to come. But I have to tell you candidly, there's some students who are repelled by it too. I'm sure there are students who don't come to UVA because they don't like the idea for whatever reason. And I think Hillary is right. I think it works here because it comes organically out of the student body, out of students here telling the newcomers that this is what we expect from you, this is who we are, this is what it means to be here. If Harvard were to call me and ask me about this, I'm almost certain they'd be talking about how can we administrators do this to the students, and we'd not be talking about how can the students run this system for one another.
The question reminds me of the issue about, let's say we wanted to advise another country about what kind of constitution they should have. Something that we've done on a number of occasions and often without much success. And it reminds me of a book I read a long time ago called Understanding Law in Micronesia, where we went to Micronesia and tried to sort of give them the benefit of our wonderful wisdom of laws and imposed, all these things that we thought were wonderful things. And the people there had no idea what we were talking about. And they just went on their merry way, just doing what they did before. But they knew that every once in a while some lightning bolt would strike them and they'd be hauled into court for some reason they had no understanding about and punished for things that they didn't understand. So I think that's the danger with this kind of thing. Now, I think with the honor system, it's a very different kind of thing, because you would hope that these values are universal values and that everyone would rush to commit to them. But I think that's the key thing. I agree with President Sullivan. The key is commitment, that you need the commitment of the group. They have to decide what kind of system they want, how they want to run it. And I would hope that it would come from the students themselves. And so if it is a system that students themselves create, commit to, and want to live by and actually live by it, they'll do fine. It doesn't have to be like ours. It could be their own system. But I think that's really the key to make it work.
And it's hard just to make it work all of a sudden. You can't just pluck a system out of the air and pick and mix and stir and you have a new honor system. Nothing's clearer than that we have steeped ourselves long in a tradition. I think that's why people responded so quickly in June. They immediately sensed an offense to their ethical sense. And really, to me, that's the profound lesson that we can teach, that universities are not just about a collection of consumers who've paid it down and will get credentialed, that there is a kind of ethical formation of character that can occur in these 4 years that doesn't come again in life in the same way. It's such a shame to miss the opportunity in that sense. If Harvard or anyone else wants to think more deeply about the ethical character of university life, good for them.
Every few years, there is some type of referendum on the ballot for students to vote on concerning the honor system. Certainly in the 6 or 7 years that I've been dean, it's come up a few times. And while students have voted over the years to affirm the system, there is still a strong feeling that a large number of students are simply ambivalent about the system itself. What ideas do you have about ways in which to better engage the student body?
Well, I guess so. This is our committee's really top priority, and I think the first, you have to engage the student body, and I think that's something where we can't just sort of have a few events and tell ourselves that we've engaged and we've checked that box and we're ready to move on. I think we actually have to have substantial and meaningful conversations about what has your experience been, what does it mean to you to live within this honor system, would you report a case, why wouldn't you report a case, is that not even so important to you because you still enjoy the benefits of leaving a laptop unattended, but really asking people questions about how they operate within the system. And I think sometimes it's the longer path, but I think it's the more productive path for the committee and for us as a community to really reflect on exactly how do we interact with our honor system, how do professors view the system. And I think if we have a better understanding of that, we can then more appropriately address solutions. I feel it must be like the movie Groundhog Day with the honor committee, where just every year we get in and we say, we are the committee, we got it, and then we try our best, and then we take a step back, and then we take a smaller step forward. forward, and then the year is up and we start all over again. And I think this year, at least, we're going to try our best to lay a foundation for future years to really try and understand exactly what do students think and why do they have those opinions, and how do we move on from there.
I think one challenge, too, is that every year 1/4 of the undergraduate student body leaves, and 1/4 comes in and knows nothing about, I think some students do come here because of the honor system, but for all intents and purposes don't really know how it works. And so there's obviously the energy spent on just informing students about what honor is and does and how it affects them in their day-to-day life. But I think it's important to stay energized in enlivening the notion of honor itself and thinking about what that means just beyond the judicial repercussions and what it means as a value. And that just requires a constant commitment. And it's thinking about challenges at UVA. I mean, it will be harder, I think, in the coming years when the school gets bigger. It's easier to keep these concepts alive and these debates alive when the school is smaller. So I think that it's just going to require honor thinking about how they can reach more students that in their pockets of the university might not have a friend on the honor committee or might not have ever been to an honor information session.
Everything that I do at the university, I would say, is guided by ideals, and any loss of ideals would, for me, be a loss of my vocation. And what I think about all the time with my students, but also with my children, is the danger of ideals becoming too distant from the real. The ideals have to be close enough to the real so that you know you can reach or aspire or move toward the ideal. And in a way, that's the conversation that I would like to have. How to make this inspiring ideal real enough so that people don't run away from it, circumvent it, half commit to it. It has to be an ideal that's close enough to live by.
Well, we're academics, so more conversation is always good, right, from our perspective, right? If we could talk about anything, we feel we can come up with a solution. But I think we also have to take into account what it is that we're talking about and whether the conversations are really contributing, because I think if you have too much noise, that can also contribute to the cynicism. So one thing I think to talk about would be just to acknowledge why these kinds of cases are so difficult. So one of the consequences of the single sanction, and I actually have gone back and forth about the single sanction myself, but one of the consequences of it, of course, is it's sort of like the death penalty, right? If you're going to have a single sanction where the sanction is expulsion, you're going to want to be pretty darn sure that the person actually did it and that they had the intent to do it. And in order to make those kind of determinations, that's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy, and you're going to have situations where people who thought it was a pretty open and shut case are going to be disappointed when the honor committee reaches a different result because they were faced with facts that other people don't have and will never have. And that's the reality, right? So that's always going to happen. And so the question is, what do you do about it, right? So you can acknowledge that. We can talk about it, but I think that people have to think about how are we going to deal with that reality? What are the responses going to be? And I don't really have the answers, but if we don't talk about that frankly, then there's a danger that people will become cynical and opt out of the system. Now, in terms of other kinds of information that might be helpful, I mean, here's one thing. I don't know if this has ever been done. Maybe it has. But here's a research paper idea for someone who might be interested. Suppose someone did a study of people who have actually been kicked out of the university for honor violations 10 years later, and what impact that had on their lives, and how they responded to it. You could call it dishonored, right? And I think that might be very interesting because one of the things that comes up is people don't know that kind of thing, and so there's a lot of fear. I'm going to ruin this person's life by voting to kick them out of the university, and maybe the answer is yes, you are, or maybe the answer is well, it's not quite as open and shut as I was saying before. So so thinking about different kinds of information to talk about and collect might also help move us forward.
I'm going to depart from my moderator hat real quickly and make a quick comment because a lot of people don't realize this. Over the years, and I've been an alumnus of the university for a long time, but over the years, I have been so impressed with Vice President Pat Lampkin, who any student who is found guilty in an honor offense, who sits down and works with to try to find a new place to go to school. And so many people in this community have no idea that happens because it happens in quiet and in private. But I want to throw that kudo her way, because we are not a place like the old, you're too young, but there was a TV show in the 60s when I was a boy where they ripped the epaulets off the guy, and it's very dramatic at the beginning. You remember the show? It's very dramatic, and break the sword. And, that's not what we do here. We don't march them to the edge of the university and, put them on a slow boat. It's a little more dignified than that. But I want you to understand that there is a very compassionate role that is played, by Vice President Lampkin, and has been for years, in terms of assisting those young people. On the next question, I want to follow up on a point that Hillary made, which is, as we grow, as we expand as a university, and what that means. And about a year and a half ago, I'll do this as the predicate to the question. About a year and a half ago, I read a great little book called In the Days of My Youth, when I was a student at the University of Virginia, 1888 to 1892. It was written by a man in the 1940s, reflecting back on his days as a student from 1888 to 1892. The only indignity was it was published by the University of North Carolina Press. And in the book, at the end, what's fascinating is in the 1940s, it's a wonderful book, but at the end, he's talking about where the university is at that point in the 40s, and he's lamenting the fact that it's gotten so big. I think at that point 500 students, or maybe 1,000, and how's it going to work, because it's not teeny like it was when I was a student. And one of the stories he tells is how a violation of the honor system was handled by two young men, because it was all men, two young men making the accusation to this young man who had lied, cheated, or stolen. And he would pack his bags and leave. He would acknowledge guilt, pack his bags, and he left, and that was it. That's how it worked. And at the end of the book, he's saying, how does this place continue to function as it gets bigger? And Hillary touched on that, which is, and I guess my question is along the lines to the panel, as we grow bigger, and we know we will, even as we have, is honor scalable? And can we make this community of trust and this system work in an increasingly larger place?
Well, for me, I think the answer is yes in many ways because of that story. For a history class, I was able, in April, May last year, right when, after I got elected to the committee, to be able to do some research in special collections on some of the old documents. And this was their biggest fear in 1910, was not only were we getting bigger, but Northerners were going to come down to UVA, and the honor system cannot exist with New Yorkers here. And here we stand.
And we're still working through that, by the way.
So,
yeah.
And here we stand now, 100 years later, with Northerners and students from all across the world, and we still do have an honor system that I think a lot of us are proud of. So I think this question is is it scalable, is one that is asked over and over again every single time we expand, and I think we find that really the commitment and this notion of the community of trust, it's really the positive aspects of honor which allows it really to persevere. It's not necessarily that we do have a very severe penalty, but it's that we really hold these values dear and we find them important to us, that they're able to be transmitted from one generation to the next. Now, I think a lot of that comes that each generation needs to stand up and do it. If students abdicate that responsibility and don't take responsibility for their own system and passing it down, I think that is where the trouble will come from apathy more so than changing population size.
President Sullivan, please.
Well, I think that there's also an issue of different kinds of commitment. A student who moves to Charlottesville, lives here in a residence hall, has made an all-out commitment to the institution, and believing they've also made an all-out commitment to the honor system is easy to believe. But increasingly, as we go forward, we may find students have a much more limited commitment. So let's think about when we adopted semester at sea. We had never had semester at sea before. Students go to sea for one semester, as the name implies, and for most of them, that'll be the only connection they ever have to the University of Virginia. So we had a lot of honor problems, right?
Yes.
Not with our own students, but with students from other schools.
Correct.
Who didn't understand what this is all about and why it applied to them and so on. Well, now think about the kind of online experiments we're doing. So we have joined Coursera. We have 60,000 people registered for our opening courses in January. Now, this isn't a problem for you guys, Stephen, because they're not going to get any grades. So, right now...
We made sure that we've had those conversations.
Right now, there's no issue. But we do know from other sources that there's widespread cheating of every sort going on in online learning. And so if we got into online learning in a large way? Are we segmenting it from the honor system? Are we going to try and inculcate these people in the honor system? What if this is going to be their only connection with the University of Virginia ever? Will they be committed to us in the same way the students are who are here to take a degree? I don't know. That's not just a question of size. That's a different kind of question.
But it's an important one.
I think any student, when they come to UVA, tries to find a way to make the school smaller. It amazes me how, even like living on the lawn and walking around, how many people are involved in things that I've never heard of, but are big organizations, and they're doing great things here. There are so many pockets to this place, and that's what really makes it as magical, and it's a good place to study. But I think the challenge that comes along with all those different pockets and small communities is thinking about how we, as a student body, can reach each other. It's hard to know to what extent you are representing students or you are reaching into those different areas when you might not even know that they fully exist. We can all accept that it's a diverse student body and that there are thousands of students, but how to effectively transmit messages and engage in a lot of these questions of honor, I think, is much more difficult. And that's something that we should all continue to be thinking about and that we have to be very innovative in addressing.
We've been talking about honor and the honor system, and they're close, but they're different. It's clear that honor is a good thing. So is forgiveness, so is loyalty, so is trust and love. We would never want to give up on honor. That seems absurd. No matter what we're doing, we don't want to give up on honor. And we know we live in systems, and systems have to live in history. And sooner or later, there will be adjustment to any system. We've talked a little bit about what happens when a new student comes, and no matter how prepared they are, it's different. You all know it is, to arrive here and see, so that's how the honor system works. So I think about it a little differently. I think about this question of mentorship and what we can do to offer mentorship to a growing university. I think that's the great challenge. The advising system, sometimes it works, but it's a creaky system. I know I talk to so many students who say, I'm here in your office, but my roommate wouldn't dare cross that threshold. They would be afraid. You would turn to them and say, so why are you here? And I despair when I hear that, because I feel like I could talk to anybody. So just come in, and you want them to come, but you know that the mentorship barrier is there. So I hope that during this year, when we talk about lots of things, that's one thing we can talk about. Don't get stuck in the advising system, but ask how we can guide and give mentorship to new students and ongoing students.
I think that, to go back to the original question, I think that the honor system can accommodate an increased size because the values that are the bedrock of the honor system are big things that most people agree to. So I think the honor system perfectly accommodates those. Where I think the challenge is in the smaller things, and that is sort of to build on something Michael was saying. It's not only about the honor system, it's about the other values that are included within that system that don't necessarily amount to honor violations, but just the day-to-day activities. And it is true that in smaller communities, people behave differently. That is, there is a greater feeling of reciprocity. If I'm going to see you tomorrow and the next day and the next day, I'm going to behave much differently than if I'm only going to see you once a semester or perhaps at a football game or a party and never see you again. And that's where the problems come. The problems come in these sort of day-to-day things. And ethics depends, it's like any other kind of muscle, to sort of go back to something else Michael said. It has to be exercised. It's not something that you either have or you don't. You have to practice it all the time. Every one of us has to do it. And it has to start small, and it's a lot easier to do that in a smaller community. It doesn't mean it's impossible in a bigger community, but it's more of a challenge. So I think that's where the issue is. How can we, to build on Hillary's point, how can we sort of make these pockets of smaller communities where people will have not only the chance but feel the obligation to practice these smaller steps of honor and ethics that can lead to the bigger things?
Since President Sullivan, I know, has got to catch a plane to go to an ACC meeting, the last question would be for the panel, what's the, I'm terribly sorry, you have to go to Chapel Hill. What are the, other than them, who wears that color blue? What are the greatest challenges facing the community of trust? And what do you think would be the best way for us to address those challenges? Why don't we start with you, President Sullivan? What do you think is the greatest challenge facing our community of trust?
Well, I think there's two things. You know, one of them is a pervasive culture of cynicism in the culture at large, and a kind of making light of strongly held values. And I think our students do a good job of resisting that, but I think that it's always a pressure that's there. I think the other thing, and there have been studies done of who cheats in college, and we have the right demographic for people who will cheat in college. So we're actually swimming upstream. People who have very high expectations of themselves, who are very high achievers, and whose parents are expecting a lot from them, are often the ones under the greatest pressure to cheat. And a lot of those students come here. And so, you know, what I hope is that the Honor Code gives them a way to push against those pressures, while at the same time they're pushing against the pressures of the larger cynical society, which says there really is no such thing as honor and you people are deluding yourselves. And by the way, I do not for a moment believe that myself. I think it's one of the most endearing and enduring parts of this community. We don't believe that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'll just turn the issue a little bit, building now on what President Sullivan just said, because it seems just right that it would be tempting to set aside all these difficult questions and to say, my head's spinning, not the single sanction question again. But those questions touch something essential. And I want to go back to something that I mentioned a few times, but in the background of everything we're saying, we know that we're living through historic times at the University of Virginia, and if you can just ascend to the mountaintop of the future and look back, you know that this year, 2012, will stand there since the founding as one of the great years. So, as some of you know, we're committed, many of us committed to making this year a year where we sustain conversation like this. The question of the future of the honor system coincides and converges with the question of the future of the university as such. I hope you got these little cards that we're passing around that give you this email address, humanities at virginia.edu, sorry. And if you write there, then you can begin blogging away with the rest of us, because one of the things we hope to offer is a chance for an ongoing online conversation about all these issues. And then step 2 in this week is a meeting tomorrow, and just to remind you of that, 4:30, Now Hall 101, under the heading the June events and after.
For engineering students, Now Hall's in the South Lawn. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I'll say a couple of things about what we could do. I think one thing is that we live in a society where the emphasis is very much on rights rather than obligations. And sometimes we're very comfortable talking about rights and less comfortable talking about obligations. And the honor system is about obligation. It is about the obligations that we owe to each other. So I think, you know, recognizing that challenge and working on that it's actually not only that we have obligations, but it's actually a great thing. We're blessed to have obligations as opposed to burdened with them. I think is something that we can try to inculcate more in our community. I also think that we have difficulty in our society, and I think this is building on something that President Sullivan said, dealing with certain kinds of ethical issues and even talking about them. There's a great danger of what we might call ethical silence, a reluctance to talk about ethical issues and really engage with them. And I think that is something else that we need to try to acknowledge and combat. So I think those are a couple of things that I would want to focus on.
Anyone else? Statement?
I think Professor Levinson touched on this as well. I think it's really a special opportunity to be a student at UVA in this year at this time. And I think in many ways it's a responsibility, it's an obligation to really I don't want to say take advantage of it, but take hold of it and really make the most of what this year can be. I think there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of momentum to really have a serious impact on the future of the university and the future of the experience here. And I'm personally really excited that I didn't graduate last year, my 4th year, for many reasons, as this year as well, and really being able for all students to share in this experience that I think could have lasting effects for the university.
And there is something so distinctive, too, about going to UVA, but having not gone to another university, I can't compare experiences. And so I think there's a danger sometimes with honor and taking for granted the benefits of the system that we have and the liberation that comes with single sanction and with the respect that we have of each other and the esteem that we hold each other for. Being able to, I think we've all talked about this before, leave your computer in the library, which you still probably shouldn't do, but just, I'm not recommending that. But being able to do that and having that be like just a natural part of how we think about our day and our community is something that's so distinctive and special, and it's easy to forget that because we often haven't gone anywhere else for school.
I'm going to conclude with one quick comment, and that is that for the first half of the recent unpleasantness this summer, I was here, and for the second half, I was in Maine, at a conference of people that do what I do at big schools around the country, flagship universities. And at one point, as it was playing out, and much to all of our delight, it was clear that we were keeping the good president that we had. A vice president at another big university in a major conference came up to me and said, I've seen other schools where this kind of stuff has happened, and everybody just shrugged their shoulders and it played out and it was over very quickly. Why? Why is it different at UVA? And my response is because, not to sound arrogant, but there is a way we do things at UVA, and it derives from our concept of honor and a community of trust. And I think that what you've heard today from this cross-section of both students and faculty members and the leader of this university is that honor evolves and changes over time. Students asked me when I first came back to the university, what we used to call when I was a student the non-toleration clause, the I will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor will I tolerate those who do, meaning if I saw somebody cheat and I didn't report it, I violated the honor system. That was done away with in the past. And a student said to me, Dean Groves, do you think that was a mistake? And I said, the response I'll give you is, it doesn't matter what I think because it's your system. I'm an alumnus, but it's your system. And so to all of you, especially the students who made the time to come out here today, I would say thank you, because at the end of the day, it's your system, and it lives, and the concept of a community of trust and what it means to be a member of this community of honor only lives with you at the end of the day. And your commitment to making it work and to investing in it and to carrying it forward and to changing it however you want to change it, because at the end of the day, it's yours. That's what matters. So thank you for coming out, and please join me in thanking the panel.
Token of our appreciation for all the panelists we have, the Honor Committee has a Jefferson Cup with your name on it. So thank you.
Oh, great.